Hi everybody, welcome. This is the Ratrace seatosummit trilogy review. Now, earlier this year, I took part in the inaugural Ratrace seatosummit trilogy. This is 3 new events that have been put on by the good people at Ratrace, and it's a bit of a nod toward the 3 Peaks Challenge. If you don't know what that is, it is climbing the highest mountain in Scotland, the highest mountain in England, and the highest mountain in Wales. Ben Nevis, Scafell Pike and Snowden respectively. Now, it isn't the 3 Peaks Challenge, it's a nod toward it, and that means that in Ratrace style they have excelled the entire thing. So we're talking 3 separate ultra marathons over these 3 mountains within a 6-week window toward the end of the year. This year was the very first time, like I said, the inaugural event, and I was very lucky to take part in this very first event. Not only that, I was at the front row of the first waves. I was knee deep in it. And this video is to talk about the trilogy as a whole. Now, I have done videos for each of the 3 mountains in this trilogy, and they're all on my YouTube channel. I've also documented how I trained for this particular series of ultramarathons, because I'm not an experienced ultramarathon runner. In fact, I can count on one hand the amount of times that I've ran over 26 miles for anything. So I'm not experienced. So I had to step up my training to sort of prepare myself for this trilogy of events. These events are big asks. Do not underestimate them. Each of them has its own set of challenges, and depending on what the weather is doing, your challenges can be made a lot worse. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as the video goes on. In this video, I'm going to be talking about each of the mountains, each of the ultras in turn, but very briefly. And then I'm going to touch about the sort of more nuanced stuff, the stuff that you would only know from doing it, from having been there and lived it. So the first of these events was Ben Nevis up in Scotland. Now, this was the biggest mountain, but the least overall ascent and the least overall distance. We had to be at a mandatory bus at the finish line for 5 a.m. right? So we get on this bus takes us all the way to the start line for a 6 a.m. start. Now, if you're catching the bus at 5, that means getting up at about 3 in order to eat and get to there in the first place. So yeah, a very, very early start. Now, one of the things you might want to think about, that even if it is a warm day, even if it's a dry day, the Scottish valleys at 5, 6 a.m. in the morning, it's really cold. So make sure you pack enough warm clothes to see you through those standing around moments in the morning. Now, we got to the start line for 6, we got our little technical briefing from Keith, the MC, and we were off. Now, the first bit of this run, for the about first 13 miles, was valley running. It was undulating, but it was mostly in a valley. There was a section where you run through sort of boggy heath, and that was interesting. It wasn't particularly fun to run on, but a lot of it was just general track and trail, really quite easy running. Got to the bottom of the mountain. This is where the second checkpoint was. And one of the important things to remember is that there is a massive gap from checkpoint 2 to checkpoint 3. It's the other side of Ben Nevis. So you've got to climb all the way up Ben Nevis, all the way down Ben Nevis, and a great deal more running before you get to the checkpoint. A little bit of advice here: at that checkpoint, max out your water, completely top it up, take a few sips before you even leave the station. If it's hot, you will burn through your water. So we go up the mountain, we get to the top, the views were outstanding, and it felt like a real grueling uphill. One of the negative things about Ben Nevis is that there's only one way up, and this is the main tourist drag. So it's like a conga of ants all the way up the path. And these are not necessarily mountaineers, these are day tripping types that are just plodding up the mountain, and as such are not necessarily the fittest. So you've got an entire conga of people that are stop-starting every few feet. From my perspective, this was very frustrating because there was massive groups and you couldn't get round them. There was 3 Peaks challenges coming charging down the hill. It was relentless. There was no escaping it. It was from the very bottom to the very top. You just sort of, it was like the lazy river at the water park. You had just no choice about it. You just had to go with the flow. So you get to the top, turn around, come back down to the halfway lake. where you steer away from the main tourist track, and from there it got much better. You were not on your own because there were still lots of rat racers around, but it was only you and the rat racers for the most part. You head up this valley in the shadow of Ben Nevis. It's looming over the top of you for crossing this beautiful stream down the other side through a lovely woodland area and a big long drag back to the finish line. It totaled about 29 and a bit miles, and I think it got to about 6,500 foot of ascent. But all in all, a beautiful, wonderful day, and it's one of those that I will look back on with really fond memories. So the second event was the highest mountain in England, Scafell Pike. Now, this particular route starts at a little seaside town called Seascale. So you go there and you register, and it was a slightly later start. I think it was a 7 a.m. start. So it was getting light, even though it was in September. And it starts right there on the beach at Seascale. And they put the start arch up, and you do the first mile on beach before you sort of turn inland. And that was a really great thing to be a part of, this massive column of rat race runners running along the beach. And as soon as we turned left, there was a beautiful sunrise coming up over the valleys. Everyone stopped, took their phones out and took pictures. And for the next 13 miles, it was nearly all road. And everyone has obviously got their mountain shoes on, their trail shoes. So it was quite hard going on this sort of surface. We sort of ran along the edge of Wastwater toward the base of Scafell Pike. Again, you've got a pit stop right there before you go up the mountain. Again, I would recommend maxing out your water. This is really important because if it is hot, you're going to burn through it. Remember that. And then you start to go up, right? And it is brutal. This uphill is really steep. It's actually quite short compared to, say, Ben Nevis and Snowden, but this was quite steep. So you made hike quick. And I think about an hour and 25 minutes, I got to the top of Scafell Pike. Now, I fell into a bit of a false sense of security at the top of Scafell Pike because I thought that was going to be the highest part. What I didn't realise is that there was quite a technical bit of descent as we went from Scafell Pike down and back up to Scafell, which is adjacent to it. Two separate peaks separated by a little bit of a scree valley, which can only be described as a scree valley. Now, to get out of this valley, you have to go up a gully. And at this point in the run for us, it started to absolutely cane it down with rain, which meant this gully going up the side of Scafell started to turn into a waterfall. It was very slippy and very wet, so you had to go up slowly. It was quite technical as well. There's lots of people sort of very carefully going up this rocks sort of gully thing. At the top of there, then there was loads of ascending scree slopes, which if you've ever done that is exhausting. A bit further, you sort of go over the top of Scafell itself and you start to come down into a valley, and you're already quite tired by this point, and you get to the bottom of this valley and you look up at another mountain. And at the top of this mountain, it takes ages to get to the top of this mountain. When you're on the top, it's basically a long, slow drag downhill all the way back to the sea. And this particular event ran a little bit long. It was 34 miles and about 7,000 foot of ascent. It was a brutal day. Now, this is a prime example of what happens when the weather goes the other way. With Ben Nevis, it was beautiful. At Scafell, it was absolutely awful. From the moment I got to the top to the moment I got back down to sort of normal road height again, it was just the weather on the mountain was dreadful. Again, I was very happy to have my sort of waterproofs on at that point, and again, having a decent set of waterproofs will pay dividends on days like that. So the last and final mountain is Mount Snowden, the highest peak in Wales. This happens at the start of October, and one of the noticeable things there is that the day is already much shorter than it was at Ben Nevis. You start at a little peninsula in private land just left of Carnarvon. It's 6 a.m. start, pitch black, and you're off. After about 5 miles, the sun starts to come up after about the first hour of running, and you're heading towards the first mountain called Moel Ilios. And this is a pretty decent mountain all by itself. I think it's about 2,500 feet. And before you get there, you go through all the slate mines, lots of sort of beautiful scenery. And don't underestimate this little mountain, and it is a little mountain, but it is really quite an effort to get up it. It seems to take an enormous amount of time to get to the top. And when you're at the top, it then turns into a series of undulating peaks. So you go from the first one, which is the biggest, then to the second one, and then to the third one before coming down into sort of the valley bottom in Snowden's shadow. Now there's an enormous amount of flat running at this point. And it goes all the way around the base of Snowden, which is ginormous. You feel absolutely tiny next to it. At this point for us, the weather was beautiful. It was calm, it was sunny, everything looked beautiful. And at pit stop 2, this was again the last pit stop before you head up the Watkins path, and within about 10 minutes of me starting up the actual path at mile 26, it started to rain, and I mean rain. And by the time we started to make serious ascents up toward the ridge, the wind had picked up to 30, 40, 50 mile an hour gusts, and I felt very, very vulnerable. Now, this was the point where I sort of made the decision to get out my waterproof leg coverings. Now, this is something that you are made to pack in just about all of Ratrace's events. In fact, this was the first time since 2019 that these trousers were ever put onto my legs. And that was because the wind, even in the sheltered parts, was insane. And by the time I got up onto the ridge, it was proper sideways. And it was really, really cold as well. So people were getting really soaked through. So again, quality leg coverings, quality waterproofs will pay dividends if there is a remote chance that the weather's going to be awful. So we followed the ridges, which felt a bit terrifying at times if you're a bit afraid of heights. We followed these all the way up, and it felt like we was on this ridge for an enormous amount of time. You could see people all around us that were really suffering with the wetness, the cold, the wind, but everybody knew that there was, unlike on the other mountains, there is at the top of Snowden a cafe where you can get shelter, you can get a hot drink, you can stay in there for a little bit. So sooner or later I made the summit, and I got up there, and I did in fact go in and have a coffee and bought myself a nice dry pair of gloves. And then I got to the peak, and then I started to run down the other side, all the way back down to the finish, whereby I finished the trilogy and received the trilogy medal. I'll show you that one at the end. Who is this series of events aimed at? I, as a newbie to ultramarathon running, chose to do these ultramarathons with Ratrace because I have done Ratrace events in the past. I did the Man versus series. I've had a season ticket before now. I know they look after the people on their runs very, very well. And this is done by making sure that you don't get lost primarily. And they use these big orange arrows, and they are everywhere on this run. Every single decision point, every single change of direction has one of these arrows, so you cannot get lost. If there is a remote chance of you getting lost, there will be a marshal there. Any of the more technical parts, there will be a marshal there. They are very good at getting you round these runs, even if you are a complete novice like me. Now, obviously, this is still a race. It's still timed and ranked, so that it will still have that element of competitiveness, and there will still be those that take it seriously and want to do it as fast as they can. My advice, just let them go and get on with it. So what would I change if I could change anything? Well, I would bring these events earlier in the year. That would allow greater amount of daylight time that you can spend enjoying the scenery. Now, if you add darkness to bad weather to mountains, you are just asking for trouble. So by bringing the events forward would negate a load of those problems. You'd get better weather, you'd get better light, you get better temperature, you get fewer problems. It's a no-brainer for me. I think it might have just been a scheduling reason while it's at that time of year. The order in which the events happen, now you've got Snowden, which is at the end. That's in the darkest of the months that you're taking part. And why that's a problem is because you go up the mountain after 26 miles. A lot of people won't get to 26 miles in daylight hours, which means potentially sending people up Snowden in the dark. Again, I would potentially have a look at that route, maybe put Snowden in the middle like the other two events. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was the cutoffs. Now, it was quite clear quite early on that the events had different cutoffs at different distances, normally around the pit stops. Now, while Ben Nevis was really generous and there was no concerns for the slower runners, as the events went on, they seemed to get harder and harder to accomplish. And this was made more apparent when my mother-in-law, who is a walker, was trying to do the calculations about her pace and realizing that it would be close. And on the day, she came very close, as in 1 or 2 minutes from those cutoffs. In one instance, at the Snowden event, with the mountain being at the very end, it meant potentially sending people up the mountain in bad weather in the dark. And the decision was made to cut a massive chunk of the runoff, about 7 miles, to allow them to get up the mountain earlier. So if you are a walker, and these events do welcome walkers, but if you are a walker, try to get yourself on the first wave. Obviously, if you're in the last wave, you are just eating into the available time. And I think it's important that the slower people get put on the first wave just to give them a chance of getting to those cutoffs. So would I recommend this to other people, this series of events? Yes, I would. For lots of different reasons, but life experience and adventure are right up there with my motives. Now, while I might recommend it, it comes with some caveats. Do not underestimate these runs. They are all really hard work, every single one, and each has its own set of surprises, none more so than when you're facing up the sort of gully, the waterfall on Scafell Pike that takes you quite by surprise when you are faced with it. These technical components of the runs really slow down your pace, as does all of the ascent, so expect to be out longer than you think you will be. One of the things I wanted to talk about is don't take your training too lightly. Find a way to get into the hills and the mountains and prepare your body ahead of time. Now, I did this over a number of months. I made a series of videos, 9 videos in a playlist, how I did it, how I got my miles from 10 miles to 25 miles. Go check that out. I won't talk about it any further, just go and have a look. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was doing all 3. Now, there's a compounding effect on your body. Certainly if you're not an experienced and conditioned ultramarathon runner, each of these events took quite a bit out of me. And as I went from the first one at Ben Nevis, there was a month between this and Scafell, but only 2 weeks between Scafell and Snowden. By the time I was on Snowden, I could feel the other 2 mountains in my body. I could feel the fatigue in my legs. So do not take that lightly either. Your recovery is important and there's not a lot of it between these events. So what do you get for taking part in these events? It will come as no shock that you get a medal. So you get a blue Ben Nevis medal, you get a red Scafell Pike medal, and you get a green Snowden medal. And they are very nice medals. If you do all 3, and you don't need to do all 3 in the same year, you can do all 3 over a number of years, you qualify for the seatosummit TRILOGY gold medal. Okay, to conclude this video, this set of events was fantastic. This was the inaugural year. These were the first events. There were a few teething problems, but by next year, most of those will be gone. I would go and get it booked. Listen to what I've said. Listen to what I've done. If you're a relatively new person that wants to take a step up into really cool ultramarathon runs and really be taken care of, the Ratrace seatosummit series is a great place to start. You will be left with memories. You will be left with photos that will last you a lifetime. And that's what I take away from this series of events. All right, thank you so much for watching. Please give the channel a subscribe and I'll see you in my next video soon. Mart out.